Welcome everybody. We are here to react to episode 3 and 4 of The Last Dance, the documentary on the 1998 Chicago Bulls. If you haven't already, make sure you go ahead and check out reaction video to episodes 1 and 2 posted last week, as well as make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you are notified whenever we release episode 5 and 6 as well. Let's jump into the good stuff. If you could do me a favor real quick before we begin, go ahead and like this video. That way we can keep it bumped up. We get some more people viewing it, get some more opinions, comments. If you have anything you want to discuss, go ahead and drop that in the comments and let's discuss it. I'm going to be, as I like to say, very respectful to your opinions, because at the end of the day, these are all opinionated pieces. So episode 3 was the Rodman episode. Now right out the gate, one of the first lines we hear Rodman say is, "The Bulls had Jordan, the Bulls had Pippen, but those last 3 championships, do they win them without me?" He said he didn't believe so. That's very, very, very bold from the third best player on that team. The episode really begins in that 97-98 season when Pippen is still out with that leg injury. And it talks about how MJ wanted more from Dennis. MJ, he needed Dennis to be that number 2 that he had, or that he needed. He needed that number 2 in Dennis. And it took a Dennis Rodman ejection for him to really, really turn it on. Now, usually you don't really think of a number 2 being a scrappy guy, a rebounder, somebody that's going to tussle, especially in times like, now in 2020 where, your top 2 or 3 need to be really go-to scorers. Then you start thinking about that 4th, 5th best player being the bruiser, being the rebounder, etc., etc. So after the introduction of Rodman on this episode, they then began talking about Doug Collins. Go back to when Doug Collins was hired as the Chicago Bulls head coach. Talked about how Jordan loved Doug Collins and he wasn't going to let him lose that first game at Madison Square Garden. At the time of Doug Collins' debut, MJ scored 50 points, which was at the time a Madison Square Garden high for an individual performance. MJ really loved the energy that he brought, and they really discussed how Doug Collins was always sweating and drenched from coaching the game because he was so energetic, he was so into the game. I know we probably all can relate from time to time where we had a coach that they was always pulling on their tie, or they would take off that jacket and they would be sweating underneath. I know I tend to sweat pretty easily, so if I was a coach and had to wear a suit, I could definitely see that being me, where I was just drenched in sweat after wearing a suit for 3.5, 4 hours. So they jump into that 1989 season where the Bulls and the Cavs had played 6 times as teams did back in the day, and the Bulls got that clean swept 0-6 against the Cavaliers that year. In the playoffs, they were tied 2-2, and that's when Jordan hit that infamous shot in the Bread Forest. Ron Harper told a story about how he wanted MJ, but the coach decided Elo was going to be that man. At that time, you could tell Ron Harper wasn't really having it. And then later on would end up joining forces with the guy you can't stop. Go ahead and join him. That is what the Bulls, or people were saying, built that winning mentality. That's kind of the turning point where they just went from they wanted more than just Jordan's accolades. They wanted to be contending. They wanted to be deeper in the playoffs, because as we remember early on, the Celtics were taking care of the Bulls in the first round like it was nobody's business. But that was the series that kind of turned it on for the Bulls. Right after they had the Cavs, they had them bad boys from Detroit, the Pistons. The Bulls took a 2-1 lead quickly on the Pistons, but then that's when things got tough. The Pistons were way too physical and took the last 3 games to win that series 4-2, eventually going on to sweep the Lakers right after that, 4-0 and win that shit. The episode then goes on to tell us a little bit more background information on Dennis Rodman, how in 93, he went to the Palace, he had a gun, he says he fell asleep in the car, and then he never played again for the Pistons. They wanted to get rid of that head case at the time. He was traded from the Pistons to the Spurs. That's when he started dyeing his hair, and he kind of became a little bit more of that Dennis Rodman we know more now than the Dennis Rodman we knew with the Pistons. That was just a simple, clean-cut type of guy. Once he was in San Antonio, he dyed his hair. Madonna started helping him out. As he describes, he started being more freely on the decisions he was making. And then again, the devil jumps in. Jerry Krause said he didn't want Dennis. He didn't want none of those problems. The only reason he says he took him is because he thought Phil Jackson could control him. Phil then goes on ahead and talks a little bit about their first meeting, how he had all the rings in, he didn't want to stand up, and you could just kind of sense Phil was like, man, this is gonna be a little interesting. But again, Phil, being a player's coach, he completely understood Dennis and what Dennis brought to the table. And he wasn't, jumping, he was kind of letting Dennis be Dennis and accepting Dennis for Dennis. Dennis immediately gave the Bulls that edge. He gave them that inside presence, that toughness presence that they had lost in 88, 89 whenever they had got rid of Charles Oakley or Bill Cartwright. It gave him that mental toughness. It gave him one of those bad boys there in the paint to mix, to rumble in the jungle. So they quickly go from 1995 back to 98 and ask Jordan all these questions in regards to, is he wanting in return? And he's simply giving them the same answer. He doesn't know. He's not sure what's going to happen. He's just taking it as it is. So that led to the return of Pippen in January of 1998. And that kind of messed with Dennis a little bit. Dennis talks about how it was the three amigos and he was third wheeling. He went from being that number 2 guy that Jordan really wanted to, man, I got my good side piece in, I got Pippen back, but bro, man, you are also a part of this team. To the end of the episode, it talks about a story where Phil Jackson called in Michael and already had Dennis in there and said he wanted to go to Vegas for 48 hours during the middle of the NBA season. Jordan explains, like, yo, he's not coming back in 48 hours. Like, he's not coming back. So at the very end of the episode, we see what looks like Dennis Rodman walking out of an arena, stadium, finishing off a Miller Lite, and then jumping on his motorcycle and billing out. It leaves a lot of questions going into episode 4. It is very, very, very weird and probably very, very frowned upon nowadays. If you saw one of your favorite athletes finishing off a Miller Lite to just get on a bike, a motorcycle right afterwards and pill out. But episode 3 really digs us into, Dennis, the problems that came with Dennis, but also the good things. And then we dig more into that, I'm pretty sure, moving on into episode 4. Episode 4 takes us to Las Vegas, where I currently am right now, enjoying some quarantine time of my own. Now, instead of being gone for 48 hours, Dennis was gone for 7 days with his girlfriend at the time, Carmen Electra. Starts off, they showing him having a good time, alcohol, out at clubs, having a good time. MJ said he wasn't coming back in 48 hours. So guess who had to go get him? Yeah, you guessed it, Michael Jordan, to save the day again. Episode 4 dug into a little bit of Phil Jackson's background, talking about his Native American beliefs. It takes us back into his playing days with the Knicks, where he won a couple of championships, and then beginning his coaching journey overseas, the CBA, and then finally getting an assistant job in the NBA after this. So Jerry Krause calls in Phil Jackson for an interview. Comes in, doesn't like the way he comes in for his interview. Phil Jackson is very laid back, very relaxed in his dress wear, and Jerry Krause wasn't having it. 2 years later, Jerry Krause redeems himself, or gives Phil Jackson that second chance. He gives him a call, tells him how to dress, come and get you a position under Doug Collins. But this is kind of where the things get spicy, and as you can see the way that Phil Jackson worked his way in, it was kind of the way that they showed him moving his way out with the whole Tim Floyd situation. So let me explain. So Tex Winter had this triangle offense, and he was the first person that Jerry Krause hired 11 seasons previous whenever he became a member of the Chicago Bulls. Tex had this triangle offense that he had been trying to implement. But Doug Collins was really, and you see in the documentary, he doesn't really want to talk about why he didn't want to use it, what he might have missed out on with those championship rings. He just says he didn't really want to mess with it. So that's whenever Jerry Krause was telling Phil, hey man, you need to go ahead and start paying a little bit of attention to this triangle offense, because that's what I want. Can you kind of see where Jerry Krause is pulling a head coach into the making before? Kind of how he was hanging out with Tim Floyd and inviting Tim Floyd to his stepdaughter's wedding before. Always been a little shady man, I see. So in July of 1989, the Bulls fired Doug Collins, and guess of course who they hired? Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson implemented the triangle offense through Tex Winter because he wanted to see everybody get it more involved. He knew that the Bulls weren't going to be able to win a championship with Jordan scoring 34, 35 points a game. He needed everybody to be accountable. He needed everybody to be productive so they get the best out of their team. That's kind of how it still works out nowadays. You see, most of the time these scoring leaders aren't the players that are on the teams winning championships. It's more somebody that can do a little bit of everything. It's the teams that got those well-rounded teams that got a lot of players pitching in, whether it's offensively, defensively, or both. In 1990, that first season that Doug Collins was there, the Bulls took the Pistons again to Game 7. But as many of you know, this was the game Pippen didn't feel well, and Pippen left with the Bulls down 20 in the third. The Bulls weren't able to surpassed the Pistons again for the second straight year. But that put fire into the entire Bulls. It discusses early on how Jordan didn't do weight training. He was just a simple basketball player. And I think over time, that has shown the involvement of today's players as opposed to last players. Like last players, they were just basketball players. And now, like, the training, the physics, everything is just way more detailed, intense. There's more training. Times have completely changed, and it's just scary to see what some of today's players could have done then. At the same time, what those players could have done now, as we're more offensive protected on some of these players. Like Jordan was getting pounded, they were showing him against the Pistons, like pounded. But nowadays, he'd get a lot more fouls. He'd be shooting a lot of free throws on maybe some legit fouls, and there'd be a lot of players paying a lot of fines, getting a lot of ejections, having to be a little bit smarter. Between that 1990 season and 1991 was when Jordan put on the 15 pounds as part of all of his weight training. Leading into that next season, he was more confident with himself and Pippen was confident with them. They finally knew like this was kind of the time it was time to take off. Now running it back to episode 1, remember Pippen signs his contract now before they take off winning these championships. So he signed 7 years, $18 million before they won a title. Had he waited one more year, could have been a bigger bag. In the 1991 playoffs, the Bulls take a 3-0 lead in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Pistons, commanding lead. And that's when in Game 4, Dennis Rodman shoves Pippen in the back, and the Bulls weren't bothered anymore. They weren't wanting to retaliate. They didn't want to cry to the refs. They had mentally got tough, physically were better than them, and they knew that this was their time. The Bulls finally had arrived. 4-0 sweep over the Pistons. Swept them so bad that the starters for the Pistons left the court with 8 seconds left, walked right past the Bulls, and didn't shake hands. Now, I know a lot of people say sportsmanship is sportsmanship, and you should say, good game after every game. Me, personally, not that I don't have sportsmanship, but I hate losing. And I maybe like it's something like that, at the point of whenever you're winning, you're playing for championships, not regular season games, you're playing for championships. It can be weird, I guess, at times to go and congratulate somebody that took what you wanted. But it was Bill Laimbeer that said they weren't shaking hands. And y'all know how Bill Laimbeer is. MJ's still really, really, really pissed off, as you can tell what the Pistons said. He was like, he's probably thought about it and whatnot. And you can tell they're pretty bad. And then Isaiah tried to say that that's just how the times were. Nobody was saying, good game. He tried to talk about how the Celtics, whenever they overtook the Celtics in the late 80s, how they had just mobbed off. And, he was just like, that's how it is. And obviously times have changed. A lot of these players are more, they communicate more. They have stronger relationships. They're vacationing together, or they're, summer ball is different. There's a lot has changed from like the late 80s, the early 90s to where we're at right now. But a lot of the stuff we saw then, we're never going to see again. So with the sweep of the Pistons, started that party on the plane, and the Lakers in the NBA Finals. At that time, it was Michael's turn to show that he could give it to Magic. Lakers took game 1 by 2 points, but that's whenever Pippen started picking up Magic Johnson full court and just forcing him to not be Magic. Bulls won the next 4 games, and to talk about how Jordan began to realize he could have confidence in his teammates, that this is what they were intended to do. This is why Phil wanted everybody to be better, because Sean Paxson started hitting these jump shots in the fourth quarter and was being a productive piece to their team, knowing that the Lakers were going to have to double Jordan or give help on Jordan, that there was going to be somebody open. Will Purdue talks about after they win the championship how all we've seen is the aggressor. All we've seen is that tiger, that person that's angry. And Jordan just let it out finally after winning that championship. He had finally come over that hump. He had got past the Pistons. He made it to his first NBA final and was able to win his championship with his team. Right after that, it takes us back to 1998 with another plane trip. The Bulls getting on the plane following the Super Bowl. Jordan on there, collecting some money from some bets. Talking a little trash there to one of his teammates. Giving Bill Winnington a little grief about being an expensive media member and whatnot. And then as you hear the narration, it takes us back to, that's when in 1998, in January, Jerry Krause reinstates that this will be it for Phil Jackson. This comes at a time where they start showing, asking Jordan, hey, has anything changed? And Jordan's still like, no PJ, no me. No PJ, no MJ. He's just keeping it real. They go to Utah to play in early February, right before the All-Star break, and go from having a lead to losing to the Jazz by 8. And all these questions going into the All-Star break are circulating on this team and their future. Now, why would Jerry Krause do this in the middle of the season, especially when they got the ball rolling? Pippen's been back for 3 weeks. You know, things are starting to click, and then you do this right before the All-Star break. This puts us through episode 4. We have episode 5 and 6 coming up next week. Very interested to see where this goes. We obviously have been, given a little pointer that the Kobe might be in episode 5 or 6. And I'd like to see these stories that keep rolling, back in. It's crazy. It's interesting to find these little details, such as whenever Rodman came back to practice after that trip to Vegas and they had to do that running, and Jordan's like, he turned it on and ran 4 laps. So it's a lot of little details we've seen. They end every episode real well, so episode 5 and 6, I'm sure we'll do the same. And we will see where this goes from now. For now, make sure you go ahead and subscribe, like this video, and we will see you guys next week for a reaction on 5 and 6. Peace.